think it's really important. Of course, we've already had the meetings in May, which more or less sort of established the type of discussion which is probably going to be happening now in the US as well, because of course there was a lot of commitment about investments and about trade, and also cooperation more generally. So I think what we're going to see now is confirmation of some of those decisions that were made. Remember, there were loads of industries or industry heads and banks that went along with President Trump when he did his visit a few months ago. So I think that's really quite important to solidify what was discussed then.
أود أيضاً أن أسأل عن توقيت هذه الزيارة، يعني ما مدى أهمية هذا التوقيت في ظل كل المعطيات العالمية والتحديات الجيوسياسية؟
Well, the first thing, of course, is what has been happening in the region and Saudi involvement in making sure there is peace and stability there is going to be quite important. The other thing is what's happening in relation to the oil market, where, of course, we've seen some stabilization of prices, and for Saudi in particular, given the fact that prices have come down over a period of time, even though they're now stable, it does mean that they need to diversify as well. So there is that element of it, which is very important for the economy. We've seen there is a sort of the 2030 plan, which needs to be achieved. And of course, you know, the more diversification, the more involvement with the US, the more likely that is to happen. And of course, for the US itself, given that they have had this sort of tariff regime which has affected sort of views of what's going on in the US around the world, I think having a nice agreement, a good agreement with Saudi, which is so important for the region in any case, and for the US itself is I think crucial right now.
وبرأيك ما هي القطاعات التي سيتم التركيز عليها وسيدور حولها النقاش في هذه اللقاءات التي يمكن أن نرى فيها تبادل استثماري بين البلدين؟
Well, we've seen, of course, it's all, in many ways, all-encompassing, because what you've seen is in terms of the people who went last time around, you had both industry, tech, and banks. And I think the importance for the US is that there is a big area where it can be involved in ensuring that diversification happens. So there will be quite a lot of sectors which could be involved in this, whether it's on the infrastructure side or on the services more generally side, because of all the rebuilding that needs to, or the building actually, that needs to happen in Saudi Arabia itself. And of course, the other way, it's to do with oil. I mean, at the end of the day, even though in principle or in theory the US is self-sufficient, the reality is it still imports an awful lot of oil from Saudi Arabia and more generally. So any agreements there will also be quite significant. But then there is the whole IT area, AI area, where a lot of the development that Saudi Arabia wants to see happen also will depend on that type of investment going on in the country, and of course skills that are going to be very, very important to ensure that it actually comes to fruition.
بالطبع لدى شركات الأميركية استثمارات ضخمة في المملكة العربية السعودية، وسمعنا أيضا أثناء زيارة الرئيس ترامب إلى الرياض عن تعهدات بمبالغ ضخمة أيضا يمكن أن تستثمرها الشركات السعودية في الولايات المتحدة. ولكن ما هي الفرص بالنسبة للمستثمر الأمريكي والشركات الأمريكية في المملكة العربية السعودية، والفرص الجديدة ربما التي تختلف عن أوجه الاستثمار التي شاهدناها على مدار العقود الماضية؟
That's very interesting, because we've heard 600 billion, so perhaps it's $1 trillion. It would be interesting to see, you know, how high that ends up being. But of course, all this is going to take quite some time. And of course, given that Saudi Arabia is now looking at different ways, both for itself and for the region, then that gives huge opportunities for lots of companies in the US to be more involved in what happens there. And the agreements that will be made, of course, you know, who is involved, how it all gets done, all that will need to be decided at some point. We may hear a little bit more after the meetings now, but it is going to take a little bit of time before it all comes to fruition. Now that's the thing to bear in mind, that this is a part of a long-term strategy where US firms are likely to be quite involved. Of course, at the same time, loads of other companies from elsewhere are looking at this too. So I think there's going to be a bit of competition that takes place. So it will be interesting to see how that works out. But I think the US right now does need allies.